The space in the ground still lies there, empty, measured and waiting. In the vestry's dim back room, the marriage register for 1878 opens with a reluctant crack, its leather spine releasing the scent of dust candle soot and something faintly metallic. On 3 consecutive pages in the same careful hand are the names of 3 young women sisters, each entering marriage within a span of 8 months. The ink of their signatures is strangely resistant to time, as though the decades have been unable or unwilling to pull the color from them. The neat columns capture their dates of birth, their ages at the altar, the names of their grooms. But in the margins lies the more enduring detail, the same witness, written with no flourish, no hesitation, the midwife. The parish clerk of that era would later claim he did not question her presence. Witnesses often repeated in small tight-knit valleys, but rather the formality of her role. She signed not as if she had been invited to witness, but as if she had been assigned. She was not kin, yet she was present at every birth, every wedding, and inevitably every burial. A battered folio still preserves the photographs from those weddings. Each bride stands rigid beside her groom, the stillness of early portraiture, holding them in time. And always, somewhere near the edge of the frame, half veiled in shadow, is the same narrow figure in black, the midwife. Her gaze locked on the lens. The photographer would remark decades later that she never blinked. The first sister was buried before the spring had fully turned. Her death certificate offers no cause, only the midwife's name as certifying witness. The second followed the next year, the third soon after. By then, the minister was said to have grown reluctant to officiate further unions within the family, though no record shows he ever refused. Those who tended the cemetery remembered her well standing at each graveside, not among the mourners, but just apart, near enough to see the coffin lowered, far enough that no hand could reach hers in condolence. Within the registers, her handwriting is without variance. The loops, the spacing, the weight of each pen stroke, they do not change from first entry to last. Parish officials in quiet moments would remark how unnatural such steadiness seemed over decades, and how in her entries alone, the ink tone never dulled. The grooms' families seldom stayed in the valley. Within a year of each young wife's death, they moved to distant settlements or vanished entirely from electoral rolls. A district clerk once observed that of the 6 men who married into that family, not one could be found in the census after their loss. Whether they left willingly or were encouraged to leave remains unwritten. By the decade's end, the register held the complete cycle of the sisters' lives, each name twice, once as a bride, once in the burial record. And beside them, both the same signature. Hers was the only name in the parish books to stand on both sides of life in such perfect, unbroken symmetry. In a locked drawer, beneath later records, lies a page torn from the register. The date line is empty. The bride's name is blank. But in the margin, the midwife's signature is already there waiting. In the parish archive rests another piece, a letter, its edges browned, the ink feathered deep into the fibers as if the words had been drawn inward by the paper itself. It is dated June 1882 and addressed to the district registrar. The handwriting is deliberate, every stroke placed with the caution of someone used to weighing words before committing them to record. It carries no outright accusation. Yet beneath its formal restraint, there is an unease that does not fade, not even after a century. The clerk writes of what he calls a patterned expiry among the women of a single surname. He notes 3 burials in 3 years, each less than 2 years after a wedding, and each without exception with the same witness standing for both the vows and the death. The midwife her presence noted without open accusation had by then become a fixture in both joy and decline. The deaths she signed for bore no recorded cause. The clerk admitted in his letter that in rural parishes such omissions were not unheard of. But the repetition, that was becoming harder to ignore. A junior curate many years later would recall those weeks before the letter was written. The clerk, usually brisk in his duties, had grown distracted. He was often seen lingering at the vestry window during burials, his gaze fixed not on the open ground, but on the black-dressed figure standing at the edge of the mourners. Close enough to see everything, never close enough to be folded into their grief. In the quiet hours, those who worked alongside him saw a new habit forming, laying the marriage and burial registers side by side, his fingertips tracing the identical loops of the midwife's signature across the years as though testing whether her hand might tremble under the weight of repetition. The district registrar's reply to his letter is still preserved, a single sentence, polite but unyielding, thanking him for his diligence and assuring him the matter would be noted. No further correspondence followed. Archivists have remarked that the reply bears none of the markings, none of the notations that usually accompany cases passed forward for inquiry. It is as if the words were received read and allowed to sink immediately into official silence. The letter itself is cautious. There is no rumor, no accusation, only the quiet assertion that this sequence of deaths deserved attention. But in its final line, just before the formal closing, the clerk allows a fracture of unease to show through. Should this progression continue, it may in time preclude the survival of any daughter to her 25th year. That same year, another wedding was recorded within the family. The midwife was there, her name inscribed with the same unerring steadiness. 14 months later, the bride was buried beside the others. The clerk never sent another letter. Some would later suggest he feared drawing notice from those who preferred the pattern to remain unexamined. Others believed he had simply resigned himself to the futility of pressing further. His own handwriting appears less and less in the parish books after that, replaced by the looser strokes of a younger successor. In the death register for 1884, the burial entry for the newest bride appears on the surface. Complete name date, and the familiar blank where the cause of death should be. But when the page is tilted toward the light, faint indentations emerge beneath the ink left by another hand, another pen. They read simply as before. That winter, at the far end of the cemetery, a new plot was marked with a border of stones. No name. The clerk's successor would later remark quietly that it had been prepared in anticipation, for whom no one could or would say. It lay empty for 3 years. And then one day, it did not. The Vali's birth register, bound in dark calfskin, still carries the faint scent of the vestry where it once rested. The edges of its pages are brittle from the turning of the clerk's hands. The entries for one family span almost 2 decades, but the columns meant for the father's name tell a fractured story. In some, the space is left untouched, as if the pen had hovered, hesitated, and then withdrawn. In others, a name appears in firm ink only to be struck through by the same hand that signs as attending witness. The witness is always the midwife. Her script is uniform. Whether for a firstborn or a seventh child in as many years, the letters never falter. No hurried lines, no irregular spacing, only the steady, deliberate precision of a hand that seems untouched by either joy or grief. Parish archivists have pointed out an unsettling absence in rural births. It was customary for a neighbor or male relative to sign alongside the midwife, particularly if the father was away. But across all these records, birth after birth, no such name appears, only hers. The absence of witnesses, the archivists would later note, was not the result of careless record keeping. The same pages show other families surrounded by names, sometimes half a column filled with neighbors, relatives even passing acquaintances who happen to be present. Only here in this family's line does the space stand bare, or else holds a single unchanging signature. A former district registrar interviewed decades later remembered being sent to confirm the legitimacy of several crossed-out paternal names. Two of the men listed, he discovered, had left the district years before the births in question. One had died in a mining accident a full season earlier. When he returned with this information, the midwife did not protest. She listened without interruption, then without rising, produced her own amended register from a locked box. In it, each disputed name was already struck through in that same deliberate hand, anticipating the correction before it had been requested. Among the few surviving relatives, there is an unspoken pact never to discuss the absence of fathers in their family history. One elderly cousin pressed by an interviewer in the 1920s would only say, "It is not our place to question how things were arranged." The interviewer's notes suggest not ignorance, but a careful, learned reluctance. The parish register holds other curiosities. In certain entries, the year of birth appears altered not by overwriting, but by the faint thickening of ink consistent with deliberate retracing. Each change shifts a child's birth year forward or backward by exactly 1 year, placing it neatly in the shadow of a wedding or within the narrow weeks before the mother's recorded death. The reason for these adjustments remains unknown, though archivists have quietly observed how conveniently they smooth the timelines, leaving no overlaps to raise suspicion. At the bottom of the final birth entry, dated late in the decade, the father's space is left untouched. Not even a false name, just a short dash. The witness always the midwife. The child's name, however, is written in the same script as the mother's, suggesting a rare moment of maternal insistence. Within 3 years, that name would reappear in the death register. No cause provided. On the hill above the valley, the row of graves for the women of the family is easy to find. Beside them, smaller stones mark the children who never reached their majority. And at the farthest end of the row, a patch of freshly turned soil waits, its edges marked, but no stone yet in place. The current parish clerk says the plot was reserved before the child it awaited had even been conceived. At the far edge of the family's land, where pasture fades into stringy bark, scrub, a weatherboard house stands with its back to the road. Its veranda sags slightly, the paint worn down to the grain. Council tax records for the past 30 years show no variation, no male occupant ever listed, only a succession of women all sharing the same given name. The surname changes slightly as if to accommodate clerical error, but the first name is always the same. The earliest surviving record is from 1857, a rates ledger entry noting the house as occupied by Miss Midwife. Every renewal thereafter maintains that occupation without the marginal notations that usually mark a change in tenancy. No transfer of title is recorded, yet the tax was paid without lapse even in years when drought forced most households into arrears. Payments, the clerk once remarked, were always made in person by a woman who looked no older than when he had first met her despite the decades between their meetings. Parish accounts place the midwife's house at the center of every significant family event, though never as the site of celebration. Brides were seen entering its doorway in the weeks before their weddings, staying a night or two without explanation. The visits were rarely acknowledged, and the women returned home with the same pallor, the same quietness they had when they left. Births too were said to begin there, even when the family home stood only a short walk away. Neighbors recalled the lamps burning in those front windows, through the small hours, steady and unblinking against the dark. At night, from the lane, a passerby might see the silhouettes, two women moving steadily from room to room, one carrying a basin, the other a small bundle held close. Those who entered described the house as orderly, but not in any way that suggested comfort. There were no personal effects, no photographs, no books, no ornaments. The furniture was sparse, mismatched, replaced in fragments over time, without regard for style. On the walls, faint rectangles showed where larger pieces might once have stood. Though what had filled those spaces, no one could say. Even in summer, the air held the faint sting of carbolic, sharp enough to catch at the back of the throat. Council inspectors visiting over boundary disputes always met the same woman at the door. She produced the necessary papers at once, her tone precise, her face unreadable. No one recalled seeing her elsewhere. Never in the store, never at Sunday service, though her name appeared unfailingly in the parish books. By the mid-1880s, the pattern had begun to stir quiet questions among district officials. One clerk reviewing the rates, ledger penciled in the margin, unchanged, impossible. Pressed to explain, he admitted he meant her appearance identical after 20 years, though she had been a grown woman in the earliest record. His remark was dismissed as exaggeration, though others whispered the same. In 1886, a visiting auditor from the city added a curious notation beside the property. Property prepared for succession, though occupant remains. No explanation accompanied it, though among his private notes lay a list of houses he believed would soon pass to new hands. The midwife's house was on it. The house still stands today. Its shutters are drawn. No movement stirs behind the glass. In the parish registry beneath that year's entry for a young bride's death, a narrow penciled line appears beside the witness signature. In faint script, almost invisible unless the page is tilted toward the light, it reads, "House ready." The doctor's name appears only briefly in the valley's records, one neat signature in the birth register, and months later, the same hand in the death column. In between, there is almost nothing. He was a city-trained physician sent on a short appointment after the district's long-serving doctor died of pneumonia. Methodical, deliberate, he trusted in examination and observation. Yet, within 2 years, his entries stop entirely. It was not until decades later that his private case notes surfaced, found in a bundle of unclaimed papers in the district hospital archive. 2 births are recorded there from the same family, the language stripped of sentiment. The first, in the winter of 1886, took place in a narrow bedroom, thick with the heat of boiled linen and the yellow glow of oil lamps. Labor lasted through the night. Before dawn, the child was delivered without breath. The attending midwife, named without comment, refused the doctor's request to examine the body before it was wrapped. He wrote that she carried the bundle to a cradle at the far end of the room, where it remained untouched until his departure. The second case came less than a year later, and the doctor's notes take on a sharper, more deliberate hand. He was called again to the same house. The mother was already pale, her pulse uneven, her breath shallow, though the labor had barely begun. The midwife was present, standing beside the bed with that same unshakable composure, her face as unreadable as before. The birth unfolded in near silence, broken only by the mother's uneven gasps. When the child emerged, its color was like nothing the doctor had seen, not the flushed warmth of life, nor the still grey of death. Without a word, the midwife took the infant from his hands, turning her back as she worked. In his final entry, he wrote, "Only condition, neither natural nor learned." The phrase was underlined twice, as if to fix in place something he could not, or would not, put into plainer words. There is no recorded cause of death. The midwife refused to sign the formal medical certificate, saying she would see to the paperwork herself. Within 2 weeks, the doctor was gone from the valley. No farewells, no explanation. One nurse from the district hospital recalled hearing that he refused every rural posting thereafter. Even when summoned years later to give evidence in another matter, he did not return. In the city, his practice flourished, but his ledgers show a gap. From that point onward, there is not a single maternity case in his records. The 2 births he attended remain small footnotes in the family's long sequence of losses, yet they stand apart for their detail. They are the only moments when an outsider wrote plainly of something that could not be explained by illness, exhaustion, or chance. His phrase, "spare almost evasive," has no parallel in the medical language of the time. In the parish cemetery, the graves for those children bear no names, only a year. The stones are smaller than the rest, set slightly apart from the row of young brides. Between them, the soil dips shallowly, as if another plot has been prepared and waits still. The most recent parish clerk admits quietly that the burial register for that spot was filled years ago. Only the date is blank. The wedding came in early autumn. The air carried the first coolness of the turning season. Dust on the road settled quickly that day. The parish book shows nothing unusual. A young bride of the same family, not yet 24. A groom from the neighboring district. And in the margin, the witness signature that by then was as constant as the minister's own. The service passed without note. Bells rang in measured tones. The feast was held in the long hall of the shearing shed. It was there that the disturbance began. Police records are sparse, their language clipped. Only one surviving line carries any weight. Guests declined victuals. Bride's time marked since childhood. The meaning is left unexplained. Those questioned afterwards swore it was not the food, nor any insult at the table, but something quieter, a shared conviction that had settled in certain guests long before that day. The midwife had arrived before anyone else dressed in black as always. Her role at the feast was unclear. She walked the length of the tables before the seating began, fingertips brushing the backs of chairs. She paused at the head of the bride's place. Several guests watched her closely. Later, a few claimed she had touched nothing on the table itself. Yet the platters and bowls nearest the bride remained untouched through the night. By the time the constable arrived, the music had faltered. Conversation had thinned to low murmurs. No one would say who first spoke of the bride's days marked, but the phrase recurs again and again in written statements. One guest, a farmer's wife from 2 valleys away, told police she had first heard those words from her own mother years before at another wedding in the same family. The words were always the same, spoken before the bride had reached her majority. Always by the same voice. Always about the bride. The constable recorded no arrests, no charges. In the ledger, the matter was marked, resolved on sight, though nothing in the notes suggests what resolution, if any, was reached. Within a year, the bride was buried alongside her sisters. Her death certificate bore the usual omission in the cause column. The midwife's name appeared unaltered in its proper place. In a private letter to a colleague, the parish minister admitted that he had seen many weddings tempered by rural hardship, illness, drought, the quiet weight of loss. But he had never seen a feast so subdued, so absent of even the smallest laughter that sometimes survives in solemn houses. He suspected, though he did not record, that the unease at that table came from something older than the marriage. A shadow carried from cradle to coffin. In the years that followed, no feasts were held for the family's weddings. Marriages took place quietly, without public gathering. Yet, in the constable's log for 1888, a passing note appears: a grave dug in advance of a ceremony scheduled for the next month. The intended name left blank. The measurements those of a grown woman. The parish's cabinet card portraits rest now in a narrow oak drawer in the vestry, edges softened by decades of hands. Arranged in sequence, they show each bride on her wedding day. The earliest, 1878. The most recent, just 2 years before the present record. The poses are unremarkable at first glance. Gloved hands, folded eyes, fixed for the slow shutter expressions held in the formality of the day. The grooms very uniformed, plain-clothed, but the setting is constant, a dark drape, a vase of flowers on a small table. It is only when the photographs are placed side by side that the other presence is seen. In each frame, at the edge or half veiled by shadow, stands the midwife. Never posed, never blurred. Her face turned just enough to be caught by the exposure. In the earliest image, she stands near the archway, one hand folded over the other. In the latest, she leans against the same small table beside the vase of flowers. Her posture unchanged, her expression identical. The archivist who first remarked on this found no change in her features across the 20-year span. The set of her jaw, the line of her mouth, the faint lift of one eyebrow, each constant. Even the black of her dress was unchanged, without the fading or wear seen in others' clothing. One parish official, when shown the sequence, set the photographs aside and said only that he could not reconcile them with the passage of time. Several portraits bear faint writing on their reverse dates, photographers' notes, and in a few, the words "standing witness" in a hand that was not the photographer's. The phrase matches her signature in the parish registers for those same weddings. It is as though being photographed was not incidental, but expected a quiet assertion of her presence in both ceremony and record. Among the Valley's families, there was no open talk of the photographs. They hung for years in private homes, only later gathered by the parish after the subjects were buried. The grooms in many of these images left the district within months of their wives' deaths. Their absences are as constant as the midwife's presence. The cabinet cards reveal another detail not recalled in memory. In each, the bride's veil is set slightly higher on one side, showing more of her temple. In some, a faint shadow lies there, whether from the photographer's lighting or from something beneath the skin is unclear. A retired parish clerk, looking back years later, said he had always believed the veil was lifted to show a mark that needed to be seen. He offered no thought as to why or by whom. The final photograph belongs to the last recorded wedding before the turn of the century. The bride stands alone. The groom was absent from the frame, delayed, they said, on the road that day. The bride stood alone. Behind her, at the edge of the curtain, the midwife's face was caught in perfect focus. The reverse of the photograph bore no date, only a penciled note in the parish hand, buried within the year. At the bottom of the oak drawer, behind the stack, lay an empty cabinet card mount. Same drape, same vase, no subjects. On the reverse, a single faint word written in the same hand as the others. Next, Margaret's name appears in the parish death register, not for her age 23 as expected, but for the small notation beside it, "Inquest held." It is the only such mark in nearly 2 decades of family entries. The official record lists her as a recent bride, married just over a year, with no children. The columns for cause and contributing factors are blank. In the narrow margin in a hand, unlike the registrar's usual, appears the phrase "conditions understood." Witness statements in the district court file describe the mourning without embellishment. Margaret had been crossing the front paddock toward the main house when she stopped suddenly, as though startled by something unseen. One neighbor at her washing saw her lift a hand to her chest and stand motionless for several seconds before falling forward into the grass. There was no cry for help, no sign of struggle. By the time others reached her, she was unresponsive. The midwife arrived within minutes. No one present recalled sending for her. She moved directly to the body, instructing the others to step back. Her voice low-measured. She did not attempt resuscitation. She did not send for a physician. Instead, she examined Margaret briefly, then drew a cloth over her face. When the minister arrived, she was already walking toward the house where she remained until dusk. The inquest convened the next morning in the rear room of the courthouse. The coroner's manner was brisk, his questions few. The midwife's testimony was short. She stated without hesitation that Margaret's condition had not been unexpected. When asked to elaborate, she said only that her meaning was understood by those who needed to know. The coroner requested no post-mortem. By midday, the matter was closed. In his private notes, the cause was recorded as in line with prior cases. No medical reports, no supporting documents. Only the final page, the words, "Conditions understood," underlined in pencil. 2 days later, Margaret was buried beside her sisters, the grass above still pale from earlier graves. At the service, the minister glanced more than once toward the midwife who stood apart from the mourners, her hands folded at her waist. A parish clerk later remarked that the dress she wore that day was identical to the one at Margaret's wedding, deep black, absorbing the sunlight, giving nothing back. In the months after the parish hall received an unusual request, all future death notices for the family were to be sent directly to the district registrar before local entry. No reason was given. The instruction was filed without comment. But in the parish register for the next decade, the deaths of that family bear the subtle marks of compliance. The family's entries were written in a different ink in a hand belonging to no local clerk. At the far end of the cemetery, a fresh grave had been marked. Even before Margaret's burial, its borders cut clean into the clay. No name on the temporary wooden marker. Only a faint penciled date along its base, nearly 3 weeks before Margaret collapsed. It remains there, still in the clerk's logbook. Uncorrected. The parish death register for 1891 appears ordinary at first glance. Neat lines, measured script, births, marriages, deaths marked with the same steady hand for decades. But one entry draws the eye not for what it says, but for what has been done to it. It belongs to a young bride of the family, dead within months of her wedding. Her name is inked in the parish clerk's familiar style. Her burial date matches the minister's log, but her age? Between the columns for name and cause, the paper bears a faint wound, an abrasion as though the original number had been scraped away with a blade. In its place, a new figure, 26, bolder, more angular than the rest of the page. The rest of the entry is untouched. The cause column is blank. The witness line carries the same unwavering signature of the midwife. Later parish officials believed the alteration came after the burial, perhaps weeks, perhaps months. Under the scrape, the original impression is still there. 24. Why the change was made is never explained. No note in the margin, no erratum issued. It stands alone, quiet, deliberate, unacknowledged. A district registrar reviewing the year's entries for census reconciliation marked the page with a small cross, a private code for needs verification. In his own notes, found much later, he wrote unnecessary amendment purpose. Unclear, witness constant. Nothing more. Those who remembered the burial described nothing unusual. The coffin was lowered into the same row as her sister's. The soil above still loose from the last grave. The minister's tone was as restrained as ever. One neighbor, however, claimed he noticed the minister avoiding the midwife's gaze. She had not stood with the family, but at the cemetery gate. When asked years later, the minister said, "Only I was mindful of her presence," a phrase that explained nothing and invited no further questions. It is unclear whether the change in the register was meant to suggest the bride had survived the family's silent threshold, lived beyond the age that defined their pattern, or if it was a quiet attempt to hide that pattern from prying eyes. Whatever the reason, the effect was to remove her from the sequence in the official record, even as her grave remained perfectly aligned with the others. In the years that followed, no further ages were altered. the family's entries returned to their steady rhythm. Brides buried before 25. Causes unlisted. The midwife's signature unchanged. The altered age in the register remains the single fracture in the pattern, its stillness made more conspicuous by the absence of any repetition. Beneath the register's final binding in the narrow hollow, where spine meets leather, an older clerk once claimed to find a folded slip of paper. On it, in cramped writing, was the bride's name and the number 24. Nothing else, no date, no signature, no explanation. The slip was returned to its place and left unrecorded. At the far end of the cemetery, where grass thins against the stone wall, a grave had already been marked before the register's alteration. Its wooden marker was bare, save for a penciled age, 24. The rain has blurred it now, but for those who lean close enough, the figure is still there. Decades after the minister's death, a memoir draft was found bound in plain paper, tucked into the bottom drawer of the vestry desk. It was unfinished. Pages left, blank sentences cut short. One passage underlined in pencil by an unknown hand stands apart. He wrote of marrying couples under duress and in accordance with prior design. He never said who applied the pressure or what that design was. The surrounding pages spoke of weather church repairs, small disputes. Those who remembered him in the early 1890s recalled a man grown quiet, his sermons shorter, his voice softer. The parish ledgers confirm that during his tenure, he officiated at every wedding in the family whose daughters never reached their 25th year. And in each case, the midwife's name appears in the witness column. Her signature unchanged from first to last. Letters preserved in the diocesan archive hint that he had confided to a colleague in another parish. In one, he wrote that certain unions were not entered into by the full consent of both parties. Another spoke of a sense of inevitability that clung to some ceremonies as if the outcome had been settled long before the day itself. The shadow of the grave already resting on the vows, a phrase that never passed his lips in public. The weddings themselves revealed no irregularity. The brides wore modest dresses. The grooms stood upright. The prayers were spoken in full. Yet, his later phrase, in accordance with prior design, implies an arrangement that predated the day. Whether that design was familial, social, or something understood only by a few, the memoir does not say. In his later years, he avoided the family's property except when duty required it. He left weddings, quickly declining the feast. At funerals, he stood apart, his eyes fixed not on the mourners but on the coffin. A clerk who served beside him for over a decade said the minister's signature in the registers grew heavier with each year, as though every stroke cost him more than the last. The final lines of his confession are the most arresting. I carried the weight of names I did not speak, yet recorded. I watched the same hand bear witness to both the vows and the burial. The sentence ends abruptly, ink trailing off into a faint line as though the pen had been lifted mid-thought. No further mention is made of it. After its discovery, the memoir was returned to the vestry, locked away, never entered into church history, never cited in diocesan reports. The parish register for 1893 records the last wedding he officiated for the family. The bride's death is entered 10 months later, Age 23. Cause blank. Witnessed the midwife precisely as she had signed for over 20 years. In the cemetery, the minister's grave lies within sight of the family's row. Between them is an unmarked plot, its borders squared and ready. In the clerk's log, a penciled note beside it reads only, "Reserved as before." By 1896, the census lists the family household as it always had been. 4 rooms, weatherboard, the same acreage. But where once the age columns held several daughters, there was now only one. She was 22, unmarried, engaged in domestic duties. Her name would be the last female entry the family ever gave to an official record. The census enumerator that year later wrote in a private memorandum that she had been the only one to meet him at the gate. Her answers were precise, her eyes fixed not on his face but on the paper in his hand. He thought her voice rehearsed each detail of age, occupation, and household position already decided long before his arrival. In the months that followed, her name appeared nowhere. Not in the parish marriage register, not in any electoral roll. The next trace is in the death register. Name, date, age blank, cause blank. Only the witness line filled, with the midwife's familiar signature, the same steady hand that had marked every death before. No burial location is noted, but that year's cemetery map shows a new plot cut at the end of the family row. No inquest was called. No physician's name appears. An absence of formal certification unusual even for a rural parish. The clerk who made the entry later told his successor he had received the notice directly from the midwife. No family present, no documentation. She had placed the slip of paper on his desk, waited as he copied it into the register, and left without a word. He could not recall hearing the church door close or footsteps along the lane. Those few who spoke of her afterward shared similar images. A neighbor swore he had seen her in the paddock at dusk, motionless, head tilted slightly, as if listening for something far away. Another remembered the minister once saying she had been spoken for since birth. He later denied the phrase. The midwife's presence in those final weeks is not formally recorded, yet implied everywhere. Parish diaries note her visits to other homes in the district, each entry ending with the same line: "Return to the valley before nightfall." It is possible she was living in the family house. No census confirms it. The 1897 parish accounts show a modest payment for grave preparation eastern plot dated weeks before the death entry. The receipt bears the gravedigger's name, the same man who had tended every burial in the family row. When asked decades later, he could not recall digging the grave after the death, only that it had been ready, well in advance. Today the plot lies unmarked. The row looks complete, the grass between stones unbroken, but the old burial map still shows one more space beyond the last headstone, and in the register opposite her name, the midwife's signature remains darker than the rest of the page. The lines above and below have faded into the paper, but hers endures as if it were written in something time could not touch. By the turn of the century, she had been present in the valley for over 40 years. Her hand appeared in parish records from first breath to final burial, and then, in the winter of 1901, her own death was entered into the same book. The page is bare. Name, date, age estimated not confirmed, relatives blank, cause none recorded. The clerk wrote later that no physician had been called. No inquest opened. Her passing? required only acknowledgement, not verification. She was found in her weatherboard house on the edge of the family property, seated upright in a high-backed chair beside a small writing table. The lamp burned low. Her posture suggested she had simply paused mid-task. No signs of illness, no struggle, no moment of arrival. Among her few possessions, a sealed envelope resting atop the parish's current year register. The address written in her steady witness hand, "To whomever keeps the parish book." Inside was a single folded sheet. On one side, a list of names every bride of the family since 1878, each followed by the year of marriage and the year of death. On the reverse, the list continued past the present year into dates not yet reached. The same ink, the same hand. Some names were crossed through, others left untouched. A few bore faint parenthetical causes, blurred as if deliberately smudged. The final entry was a name the clerk did not recognize, followed by a date more than 10 years ahead. The page was returned to its envelope, without note, without comment, filed among the sealed materials in the vestry cabinet. Her burial took place quietly, attended only by the minister, the parish clerk, and the gravedigger. No stone was ordered. The plot chosen lay at the far end of the cemetery, within sight of the family's row, yet apart from it. The minister would later tell the clerk it felt less like a resting place and more like an assigned position, as if she had been set there to watch them all. In the months after her death, a peculiar stillness settled over the valley. No new weddings for the family. A gap in the parish's death entries. But the pause was short-lived. By the spring of 1903, the pattern returned. A young bride buried within a year of marriage. Cause left blank. The witness column filled not by the midwife's hand, but by another different in style, yet with the same deliberate precision. The house she had occupied remained locked for years. Rates paid in full by no named owner. Then quietly the parish stopped noting the payments at all. Yet the house did not decay. Curtains still hung in the windows. And sometimes, on certain evenings, a lamp burned low inside. No one was seen to enter, no one to leave. In the burial register beside her name, there is a faint penciled note in another hand, almost erased, but still legible to those who look closely. Witness as before, the phrase's meaning is undocumented. Its placement is unmistakable, not in the notes column, but in the field reserved for relatives. An empty field she had left in so many others. The envelope yellowed at the edges, but with ink still dark as new had been placed atop the parish's current year register, addressed in her unwavering script, "To whomever keeps the parish book." Inside, a single folded sheet. On one side, a column of dates from 1878 to 1897, each paired with the name of a family bride, each a death before her 25th year. No causes, no witnesses, only the certainty of when. On the reverse, the list continued into years yet to come, with names not yet written in any parish record. Some were struck through, others untouched. No explanation for the marks. At the bottom, in smaller script, "None past 24, none to live past 24. The words seemed pressed into the fibers, not merely written, but weighted. The clerk who read them asked no questions. He replaced the sheet in its envelope, locked it in the vestry cabinet, and made no record of its existence. The years that followed echoed the list. Every name it held for a future year appeared in time in the death register, each at the age fixed by that final note. The witnesses varied, but the handwriting, the precision, suggested one author even after the midwife's own death was long recorded. Clerks came and went, yet the envelope remained. Removed without permission, returned without sound. No key ever found in another's possession, and outside the cemetery, filled with new graves along the eastern edge, each matching a date from the midwife's list, each marked by a modest stone. No epitaphs, no scripture. One parish official in a private moment said the cemetery map no longer looked like a resting place. It looked like a ledger. The envelope still sits in the vestry, the paper uncreased by time, the ink unfaded, and the final note as heavy on the page as the day it was written. In the current burial register beneath the last name of the family, there is an empty line, the next row already ruled. The age column, blank. On the envelope's list, that name is already there, beside a date that has not yet arrived. Perhaps the strangest part of this family's history is not the sequence of deaths, but the quiet agreement that allowed it to continue, unquestioned, unchallenged, almost erased. The records are incomplete, the witnesses are gone, but the empty plot remains aligned patiently with the midwife's grave. Whether it will ever be filled, no register can say. History suggests the pattern is not broken, only paused. If you have listened this far, you already know the past is never as far away as we think. It waits, it watches, and it returns.